I'll start. My name is Anya Burgess, and I'm originally from Boston, but I've been living in South Louisiana for about 10 years. I went to violin making school about 10 years ago up in Indiana, at Indiana University in Bloomington, and studied with a teacher there named Tom Sparks. It was a 2-year program, and at the end of the program, had a finished violin, which is the violin that my first violin, the violin that I play pretty much all the time. And that would be this instrument right here. After going to school, I did an apprenticeship with a violin maker in Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. His name is Otis Thomas. And I built another violin with him. And then after the apprenticeship, I moved here and ended up opening up my mostly repair shop to begin with. I do violin. My main business is violin maintenance and repair setup. I work with classical musicians, Cajun musicians, and everything in between. So I've had my repair business now for about, 7 or 8 years. And I have a shop in the back of my house, and that's what I do every day, all day, every day, is work with violins. I build them when I have time, but that's not my main livelihood. My main thing is repair, and I do bow rehairing and that kind of thing. So I think that pretty much covers my story briefly, and I'll pass it over to Matt.
My name is Doucet, born in Lafayette, Louisiana. Let's see. I was trying to think. It was in the summer of 2000. It was my second year going up for the springtime in Nova Scotia at the University of St. Anne to go study up there. And it was on break in between semesters up there. It was like a spring and a summer session. And I drove it the second year that I went, and that was the second year in 2000. And there was a guy up there named Jonathan Cooper that built fiddles for my dad. My dad's Michael Doucet, plays bass. So I called my dad and said, hey, I'd really like to go see, where the shop and see where the fiddle was made. And I think John had made a fiddle for me in '99, I believe. So I just wanted to go say, hey, and I had met him at the Mark O'Connor Fiddle Camp. I think that was in '98. So I'd met him a long time ago. So in between break, to make a long story short, I drove to, where was that? Not Westbrook, Maine, where was John's shop? I can't remember. Warren, Maine, yeah. She can remember where his shop was. Golly. So I'm a little bit fried right now. I had my dead battery right before I came, and so I was like totally went into panic mode because I was running late as it was, so just breathe. So so I went and hung out with John for that summer. And Jean de Glace, the director of the University of St. Anne, gave me a scholarship, and Joel Savoy a scholarship to stay on, but both of us declined it. I don't remember what Joel did. I think he had too many gigs with the family band or something, but I wanted to stay and build fiddles. And so I called him and said, look, I'm going to stay at Coops for the rest of the summer and build a fiddle, Needless to say, my parents were like totally petrified because they didn't think I was going to come back home and finish up my degree at school, but I did. I was 2 days late, but late registration and all that. So during that summer, I built this guy right here with Cooper, and it was a mind-opening experience, something that I'd never had seen anybody do before. I mean, the only kind of woodworking skills that I had before was building a doghouse, and that was it. So just to see 5 woodworking, and walked out of the shop with something like that, it was like pretty cool. So, I mean, it was always on the back of my mind, and then I think it was in 2004, 2004, I officially started Doucet violins, and I started an apprenticeship with John Cooper, so I moved up to Maine, and worked with Cooper for a year, and during the side, and at night I would just build my own fiddles, and So I built one in the course of the year with him while working on all the other stuff. And then after that, then I opened a shop with his foreman named Steve Canoyer. And we had a shop in Westbrook, Maine, at the Dana Wart Mill for 2 years. And Steve kind of carried out my apprenticeship for the following 2 years. So I had a total of 3-year apprenticeship. And it was kind of like a weird apprenticeship with Steve because I was actually working on my own stuff the whole entire time instead of working on, the master's stuff. So it was pretty cool, and I had a really good time doing it. So I moved back home and just pretty much getting started again, and just really enjoyed it. And it's, and Anya is also a player like myself, and it's funny because a lot of makers aren't players, and so it's fun when you're putting it together, like you can kind of always get what you always wanted to have, So it just opens up your whole musical experience as a musician as well as a maker, because you have all that wealth of knowledge to draw on. And so we're here today. We're going to talk some more about putting this stuff together. I'm going to pass it over to the apprentice of Anya, Mr. Chris Segura.
I have not made a violin yet. I actually just started going on Anya's shop about 3 weeks ago. So I'm still just working on some really basic stuff, just making tools and sharpening knives and all that good stuff. But I guess probably when I was 5 or 6 years old, my parents would take me to Lionel Lily's house, who's a really good maker. I live down here, and he was also a fiddle player. So we would go there. We spent a lot of time in Romero's music in New Iberia. I've always been around people making violins, and I've always been interested in them. So finished school last semester and figured it would be a good thing to learn how to do. So we'll see what happens.
The funny thing about Lionel, I went there one time with my dad, and the dad was picking up a fiddle that he had repaired, and I just remember I was like a little kid, and he was driving forever, and he said, "If you touch anything over there, I will kill you," And so I remember going over there, and Lionel just taking like backs and tops and just scooting them all over so I could sit on the couch. And I was like, whoa.
There's a picture of his house over there on the wall, and you can see it's just got fiddle parts and trash and boxes scattered everywhere. And that's exactly how I remember it.
Yeah, that's exactly. That was the house, not the shop.
Yeah, it's good to pay homage to the violin makers, former violin makers in this area, and probably Lionel Willow's one of the more well-known ones, and that's just a classic story. I hear about people going to visit him, and there was no place to sit because everything was just piled up so high. He would just sit and talk to you for 3 hours. Somehow he also built violins, and there's a lot of them out there. But there were a few other makers in the area too. Abner Ortega up in Washington. There's a couple makers in the Built-Out area, mostly self-taught, and so. But in terms of like full-time, I think full-time violin makers. We are it. So.
And even Camry and Doucet made their own fiddles too, but Doucet's you can never pull a tune on it, so that Camry just stuck with it. They made it out of a cigar box and like a piece of wood, and took a screen off the screen door, like a stick with cotton twine, and so that was his big thing. Is like, anybody says they can't, there's no such thing as can't.
Yeah, if you don't have money, you can build yourself a violin out of a cigar box. So. Cut a hole in the middle, attach a neck and some strings, and you're good to go. But we both were kind of trained in the classical, that what I was just describing would be like a folk violin, obviously, self-taught and very handmade and very cool. But we were kind of trained in the more classical violin making tradition, which is an Italian tradition, mostly based in Cremona, Italy. Started in the 1500s and kind of very active on up through, say, 1750. And so that's sort of the main source of inspiration for the instruments that we built. The first violin maker who kind of made the classic plan for the current violin. His name was Andre Amati, and he built in the 1500s. And his successors, you've probably heard more about Stradivarius, Guarnerius. So those are the most famous violin makers who kind of inspire the current world of violin making. And it just so happens that the instruments that I build are more based on the Stradivari model, and the instruments that Matt builds are more based on the Guarneri model. So it kind of works out well. We represent both. We cover all the ground. And they're very different instruments. I mean, to the untrained eye, you would look at them and they would say, oh, they're they're violins. What's the big deal? But if you know a little bit about instruments, you can easily look at any violin and say, oh, that's a Strad model, or that's a Guarneri model. And it's all in the finer details, sort of knowing what to look for. For example, the shape of the F-hole varies between the two models. Hold up like the side view. See how this one is just like the classical kind of scroll shape, and that one's a little kind of less regular, you know.
But see, this is all like this is just stylistic stuff, especially the scroll, you know. But
Yeah.
even as far as like the way the body is constructed, Strads from the upper bow tend to dive down as far as the taper with the ribs, whereas Guarneri will taper 1 millimeter. That's the other thing. We work in millimeters. A 10th millimeter is a ton of wood, and it's all the matter in the world. So Guarneri will start with a 1 millimeter taper from the bottom to the top, whereas Strad will kind of stay a little bit consistent here and then kind of dive forward.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, let's talk about making, because what we're talking about now is like the more technical side of making, and let's kind of.
We're about to dork out on this. I hope y'all are ready.
The problem is if you start and you say, oh, that's good enough, I'm ready to move on. It's like a success. Everything builds on the last thing that you did, so you get successively worse if you start, kind of slacking. So it's not for kind of like the faint-hearted. Violin making is a very exacting undertaking. Like Matt said, you measure to the 10th of the millimeter. So if you can picture how small a millimeter is, it's like barely letting light through your fingers. And then divide that in 10. That's how you measure.
Like a 10th of a millimeter is a sheet of loose.
That's how you measure
right?
the thickness of a violin. So it's.
How many is that? A 10th is a sheet of paper, right?
I don't know.
Or is it less than that? I don't remember.
Check it on my. You can check it on my calendar.
But yeah, these things are called riser sticks, and this is like, I still have these things, and I'll never get rid of. My house is burning down, I will run and get these. Because these things took me forever. Everything right here is a perfect 90-degree angle, and they're both exact at 10 millimeters all the way around. And I did all that
By hand.
by hand with this bad boy right here. And
It's harder than you would think, too. As Chris is figuring out, I'm having him make knife handles. Basically, I'm having him make, here's a knife, here's the handle. It's made out of 2 pieces of wood that are, jointed in center. It's harder than you think to make a flat joint, perfectly flat joint. It takes days at first, and then over time you do it now.
You don't even think about it, Are you kind of sore from having to use different muscles with your hands?
Not really. After, I think maybe the first day or second day I was a little bit, but since then, nothing more. I've been doing the same thing for a while, mostly.
And I'm making him get it right.
Yeah.
There's no slacking.
That's totally yesterday. I haven't smashed anything yet, and so aggravated where I'm. So, yeah.
That'll come.
Yeah.
Matt, what are those things for?
These right here, I was just about to start. And Anya has a rib structure right there in her hand, and that's a completed rib structure. With these things, like I said, these are riser blocks. They're 10 millimeters tall. And how thick are your ribs when you start? I start at like 35 millimeters, somewhere around there. So what I do right here, once I have my form, we'll get to how we get to the form, but I'll answer David's question real quick. So the riser blocks, you put down on a flat surface, like that. So once you have that down, you'll take like a block of spruce, which I had somewhere around here, right here, like this. This is spruce, and you pretty much take a wedge and split it. You gotta always make sure that your blocks are split. That's extremely, extremely important, because if they're not split and you go to start cutting the corners, shaping the corners with the gouge, yeah, you're in store for a good treat on that one. So, because it won't cut right, and it's impossible to do, the block will end up falling off, and it's just nuts. Because I made a mistake one time of picking up the wrong block that wasn't split, that I thought was split, and I was like, why is this thing not working? It has bumps everywhere. So, once you have your form, which is this thing right here, sitting on your riser blocks, take like a hatchet or anything with a blade, like a wedge, split that wherever, and this is spruce, so you can see how the grains go, and then when a true piece is split, it will split right down on that grain. So you go off of that grain, and can you see the end grain right here? How it's kind of going like that? That always goes into the corner of the instrument, of this part.
Notice how exacting everything has to be.
Right here.
You know, it's not like, oh, here's a piece of wood, I'll just throw it on that corner. Like, that's not gonna cut it. It has to be the right kind of wood, it has to be, cut from the tree a certain way. It has to be then cut into a block a certain way. Then it has to be oriented onto the form a certain way. I mean, it's like, this is the classical method that I'm talking about. If you want to build a folk violin, it's endless variation from that.
Yeah,
but this is sort of like the classical model we're talking about.
So, and two, there's all kinds of kits too that are available that are pre-assembled, and a lot of this stuff is kind of already done, so you can just really enjoy and kind of just sail through it. And two, you can also buy like pre-carved out tops, everything pretty much. Anya and I, because we're professional makers, I mean, the stuff that we make is totally like, we get to pick and choose exact grains that we want for sound, and stuff that you may get from there. I've seen everything you can get from there, and it's generally not that good. It's way overpriced, and, you can buy it way cheaper, and make it yourself in half the time and have it right and better. But let me back up real quick. There's two things that you have to do before you get to this form part right here. You have to come out with what's called an outline. And this can be made pretty much out of anything, out of plastic, like little flimsy things like this, or big thick plastic, just anything that's not going to move, warp, change, or anything, because these things take a tremendous amount of time to make. To me, your outline is pretty much, it all starts with the riser blocks. You have to get those babies exact, then you can start to see stuff. Everything is dependent pretty much on your outline. All your weird stuff is going to come from your outline.
Eventually, you end up taking out the form after kind of right towards the end of the assembly process. You take this out. It's remarkably easy to do. You just sort of pop, 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 and sort of slide it out around that form. It's actually surprisingly easy. And
unless you're sloppy one night and forget to check to scrape the glue out.
Right. Unless yeah. Sometimes it requires a little bit of a tap on a hammer. I mean, usually it does. Tap, 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 tap out the corners. And you end up with this. This is the rib structure without that form in it, right? So those corners are still there. Top block, bottom block, and four corners. You'll notice that there's some extra pieces of wood in here, right? Can you see that? Those are called linings, and those just kind of widen the width of the ribs to provide support for gluing. So you have the rib structure. Against that, you glue the back, and against that, you glue the top. This is high glue, and it is in a crystal form. Comes in different strengths, but this is the glue of choice for assembling violins. You don't want to use anything other than this. And obviously, you dilute it in water. It becomes like a gel, like a real jelly, and you put it into a glue pot, which we didn't bring, but you put it into like a heating element, so that, and it has to be we sound like maniacs. It has to be at 140 degrees which is true.
We're
It's like,
nuts. You have to be nice to do this, you know, there's no other way.
yeah, I'm realizing I'm hard to describe. But anyway, yeah, it has to be at 140 degrees to use it, to be able to, you know, reach its full strength. And you only have 2 minutes of working time to assemble everything. It's not like tight bond, Elmer's glue, you know, where you can kind of play around with it for a little while. After 10 minutes, it kind of starts to set, but you can probably still peel it apart. With this stuff, you better have your timer out the first few times you use it, because after 2 minutes, if you don't have your pieces firmly where you want them, forget about it, start over. So, but the great advantage of this stuff is that it's completely reversible. So if you mess up something, let's say, you know, you're gluing,
But we never mess up.
you know, for example, I don't know, if you glue this on sideways or something, you can easily put a little knife in there and take it off, and it's completely reversible. And yet it's very, very strong once it's, you know, once it's all together.
How long should it last?
Gosh, I do repair, so I deal a lot with old glue joints that, you know, have reached the end of their life. And I would say, you know, a good glue joint, maybe, you know, with very little climate change over its life, you might get 50 years, maybe 100, maybe if you're lucky, 100 years out of it. But usually they kind of pop open a little bit, but they don't crack. The joint will pop, the wood won't pop. You know, the wood won't crack. So anyway, this stuff is great. And if you're going to build violins, a lot of guitar makers use this, mandolin, you know, string instrument makers use hide glue. A lot of people are very intimidated by this at the same time, because it doesn't come out of a bottle. You can't just squeeze it and just rub it around and then slap it together. You know, you have to actually kind of cook it. It has to be right. So anyway, that's hide glue. And so what Matt was talking about, like with putting the blocks, corner blocks onto the rib, it's done with hide glue. So, like I said, when you take this off, you can just go pop, pop with a hammer, and it pretty much pops off. If you were using super glue, tight bond, you couldn't just pop, pop, it wouldn't come off. You know, you'd have to like cut it out. You know, this is what's vibrating primarily to produce the tone of the instrument. You know, this actually vibrates. You know, if you were to look at it in a special machine. The rest of the instrument, including the neck, is just structure. You know, it's just the strength provides the frame, the body. So, so this is always a hardwood. It has to be, and if you're building in the classical model, the Cremonese model, it's always maple, always. You know, if you're a folk violin maker, you might choose whatever other hardwood that you have available, or for the top, you might choose cypress or something like that. But if you're building, you know, an instrument that you hope will go on to play in an orchestra one day or whatever, you're going to use spruce on the top, the rest is maple. And an interesting thing came up actually before we started about this piece here. It's called the fingerboard. It's like where you play your notes. This is also a piece of wood, you know. It's black, but it's ebony wood. And so a lot of the times the pegs, you know, the pegs, which are up here, the tailpiece, the chin rest, are probably more often than not made out of ebony, same as the fingerboard. On mine, I chose rosewood, something hard, something pretty. But yeah, basically the only thing that's not wood on a normal violin is the strings. Everything else is wood, you know. If you put little tuners on your tailpiece like that, obviously those are metal, and I have a pickup on mine because I play, you know, in a band. But other than that, it's all wood. So yeah, softwood top, the rest is hardwood.
This wood right here, I always write the date on it when I buy it, and I thought it was pretty green. I bought this in '05, and it looked to me like it was still pretty, you know, it was dense, and so I mean, it lightens up when it starts to lose moisture. Generally, after I buy wood, I always have a piece of wood, unless I know for a fact that that wood is like old, really old, and you can tell by looking at it, because it oxidizes like newspaper if you look at the dashboard over time, and also too, where you're getting it from. So if you get it from a reputable source and they say it's old, it'll be old. They're not going to really mess with you too much on that. And so the wood, and so I go pretty much by grain, wood, and also on spruce. And I want the tight grain. That's what I like, is tight grain. So this right here is maple, and this is also a pretty tight grain. But I also look for wood that when you move it like that, it already looks like it's 3D, there's already depth to it. And looking at how the figure is too, and it pretty much is consistent all the way through the board. Also, how thick it is another big thing. See that? And you can tell a piece by how heavy it is too. American wood and European wood, you can definitely tell the difference like immediately.
For me, wood selection is based on mostly cosmetic value. There's a lot of violin makers who are very scientific about the process and like measure, density and like submerge it in whatever kind of solution, or put a hammer on it and test the frequency of the plate. And that's just not my personality. That's not my mind. So I'm much more kind of into the visceral, like
look at green.
How it looks. And,
You look at the green.
Oh, definitely. That's what I'm saying. Like the visual to me is important.
Mm-hmm.
The scientific element of density, frequency, I'm just not into that. To me, it's like if it looks good, it is good type of thing. So what's the difference? I knew somebody was going to ask this because it's probably the most common question I get, and it's a great question. What's the difference between a fiddle and a violin? And the answer that I've chosen for the day is that a violin has strings and a fiddle has strings. So the most amazing thing about violins is that you can play them. You can all just work into it. It's like a work of art, and then you can actually, it lives on, and it becomes something, it takes on a life of its own. After you've built it, it's like you set it free. It's very satisfying undertaking.